Today I want to look at design elements and try and show you how that you can simplify those. So let's begin with a couple of rectangular shapes. Now then, one of the things to remember is the way that we can split off shapes. So we've got two equal shapes like this. The eye doesn't like it. If we split it down the middle and across, it's still pretty uninteresting. So what we need to be thinking about is our shapes split into sections. So if this is 1, 2, 3 and 4, you've got different size, like a square, rectangles here. That's much more interesting to the eye. If we then take this in, so we've got end up with 9 blocks. These are your focal point placements. So here, 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 and here. If this is the piece of paper, these are the areas that you want to be placing your focal point, your highest values and highest place of interest. Let's just have a look at it as if we're going on a landscape. So based on this principle, if I section off the paper, and again we sort of had 1, 2, 3, 4 areas, you can see straight away that the place to put your focal point, the placement of that is just there. Okay, never in the middle, never ever in the middle here. It just doesn't work. Another little rule as well, I mean you can break these rules, but they've been around for quite a while, is to think anything around the periphery of your painting. You don't want to be putting anything to try and make the eye go there. So if I was to put in a much darker shape at the edge, it's just odd. The eye is naturally going to go here before it goes here. It just does. And I think the lightest and the darkest it's going to go to. This brings us on to our next design element, and that's values. Within values, the way I like to think of it, it's just 5 values. There are more, of course, but if we call this 0, 1, 2, 3 and 4, it's quite a simple way to understand this. Value 0 is just the white of the paper. Okay. The next value going up is if we cross-hatch like this, just once. If we cross-hatch twice, we've got our next value. You can see it going up. If we cross-hatch 3 times, we have our next value getting darker, and you guessed it, number 4 is 4 times on the crosshatch, so that's 3, and this is 4. To get darker, you can see it progressively getting darker in our values. Now, our darkest dark and our lightest light need to be next to each other. Excuse me, when we plan out any kind of composition. So let's pretend we're going to be painting here. We've already sectioned it off in this way. Here we've got our darkest dark. Let's change this into something just for, let's turn it into a bit of a figure. There we go. That will need, the darkest dark will need to be next to the lightest light. So this value, this dark value, will need to be here. Everything else is then playing a subservient role. So in there you will have value 1, value 2 and value 3 in other places. But don't go darker than this and keep the lightest light to here. A quick way of showing this is just to quickly rub in there. We can see that's almost like a foreground. If we leave the sky quite light, that's good, but we could go around the figure with this lightness, and we'll just keep this, we'll just take off the edge of the white. We'll make sure we keep some white around it. And then let's come in with our value 2. So if we have value 2 in here, so we're going slightly darker, but we're going to keep like a halo of light around here. And then behind here, let's have value 3. But remember, we've got to keep our halo. This could perhaps be a building or something like that. If we were designing it, perhaps a building in here. Okay, but we've still got our light around the figure. If that makes sense. There we go. So our eye is still drawn here. This is very light here. We can just tonally take this into 1. Here, let's just bring in, so make this value 2. And we'll just bring value 2 all the way across for simplicity's sake, even though we know we've got this section here. Now, these 4 sections are doing different things in terms of their values. That helps a bit. So, if we look at this, back to here, we have value 0 around the figure and value 4. And then on the background, this is value 1. Value 2 we've got here. Okay, and value 3 up here. This is kind of in between. But you get the idea of the way that you can build up a composition in this way. Okay, so let's summarize quickly and see where we are. We've got our values here and our contrast and values. We have our focal point placement, which was here, and we looked at that. These focal point placements in these 4 places. We now need to look at shapes and the sizes of them. So it's interesting that bigger shapes next to small shapes always seems to work really, really well. So let's pretend that this was our building, and let's pop in a few windows to say that it was our building, and let's just build in, say, a touch of perspective in there. So the light's, let's imagine the light is coming in this way. So we're still trying to keep our light around here, lightest light and the darkest dark, into the figure. If we have smaller shapes, we won't define them, let's just pop in some around the bigger shape. The eye naturally goes there. So you've got 2 devices going on here. You've got the value contrast, the darkest dark and the lightest light, and also we have shape sizes and contrast. So small shapes and large shapes next to each other. Okay, and the last little thing I want to look at is the eye movement. In other words, the eye will go here first, and then it will start to move around the painting depending upon the values of things and the interest within that. But it will always come back to rest here at the focal point. Let's just pop in some mountains, for example, in the distance. Start to give them a bit of form and tone. Looks a bit more interesting, and perhaps some trees in the distance or some suggested buildings. Not really sure, doesn't really matter too much. Now, as long as I keep those tones much lighter in the values of 1, 2 and 3, everything's going to be great. What we need to do is, as we said before, finally just make sure that this darkest shape also is where we want the eye to go to. Let's just take this down slightly just so you can see it's just getting a little bit bigger. And there you can see the way that these basic design elements, simplified, do work. They really do work. It's something to bear in mind when you're designing your pictures, especially if you're out in nature and you're looking to copy what's there. You're going to need to be selective and very choosy, and make sure that you put the design elements in that you need to make your painting work or your sketch work. So let's go through them. Number one, shapes. Big shapes, small shapes. Sizes really do count. Contrast as well in those shapes. Number two, focal point placement. We had a look at that here, the focal point placement in these 4 key areas. Number three, value contrasts. So we've got these contrast and values from 0 up to 4. Darkest dark, lightest light, place where you want the eye to go. Number 4 is the eye movement. By this we mean that the eye will rest here and then it will start to look all around the painting and it will come back to here again. You'll keep resting on the darkest dark and the lightest light. Number 5, shapes. So we've talked about the size and the contrast of shapes, but we need to make sure we have a range of shapes in our compositions. So here we have rectangles, quite a few of them in the windows and the side of the building, the main part of the building. Here we've almost got a rectangle here, if you remember. Here we've got the triangular type shapes coming in, and here we had just lines coming down to represent trees, and obviously we've got the figure there. So different types of shapes. Always make sure though in your composition one shape dominates. Yeah, so that means that there's a repetition of that shape. At the moment, if we look at triangles, we've got 2. If we look in terms of rectangles, we've got 1 there, 2, 3 for this building, 4, 5, 6. So rectangles are dominating this at the moment. If we started to make these into trees, and these trees were like almost like round or oval in their foliage, and there was lots of them and they dominated, then they would be the dominating factor. But don't have 2 competing factors. It's always best to have just one shape that dominates. So hopefully that's helped. When we talk about shapes and the size of shapes and contrasts, we really need to make sure that we've got interesting things going on. If we had, for example, all of these, if we had loads more buildings in here and they're all the same size, that would get quite boring. The mountains could be a problem because they're similar size. So what we could do is we could balance up and just take that mountain perhaps a bit bigger here to make that a little bit more interesting, and vary some of the tonal parts. So take it tonally a little bit darker on this left hand side, for example. Okay, so you need to be thinking of all the elements that you have put together. Hopefully that's useful in terms of the design elements and simplifying them. Keep subscribing, keep coming back for more content, and take care. We'll see you again very soon.